Welcome to this, the part 11 of the beginner's tutorial series of game development in Unreal Engine 4. Today we will be talking a bit about game modes and the classes that are related to that. To start off, we have this wonderful resource. It is a compendium made by Cedric Exi Neukirchen, and he is a co-founder of Salty Panda Studios, and he has compiled this very good document that's related to multiplayer development in Unreal Engine. It describes how things work and how things are managed together. We will be using a little portion of this document for today because it shows off in a nice way some of the classes that we use in Unreal Engine. So the things we will be demonstrating and going through today will be mainly game mode, what a game mode is. A game mode is generally, all of these classes are a way for Unreal to structure your project so that you have a very cohesive and proper way to store information to make it clear in the development. The point of this being that it's supposed to be helpful for you and make it easier for you. But these are not rules, it's not something you have to do. Like for example, the game mode tends to be where you want to keep something like the rules of the game mode. So if you, for example, had one level where you did something like a first-person shooter, it would keep first-person shooter rules in the game mode, like maybe which teams are available, which team you are on, which teams you're fighting against, and things like that. Then on a different map, you might have a completely different game mode. You might have something like, let's say you have Tetris there. So when you move to that map, you suddenly start playing Tetris. And for Tetris, it's not important for you to know what team you are on and what the enemy team is. Rather, it would be something like at how many levels of rows do you go to before you lose, or something along that nature. And that is part of the flexibility with Unreal, that you can have each individual map can have a completely different set of rules and gameplay modes. A good example of this, I think, would be something like the game's Nier Automata. Nier Automata is a game which very drastically changes the way you play the game. For the most part, it's just a matter of changing your perspective, changing so that you see a top-down view or a side view or a three-dimensional orthographic view, something along those lines. But then in other parts of the game, you are like playing a top-down shooter bullet hell kind of a game where you have a little arcadey spaceship that you're flying around with, and then on the next level you're running around with this humanoid character slashing your enemies and robots with your weapons. So Nier Automata is sort of an example of what you could do with Unreal Engine if you wanted to, but you're not required to either. You can just have the same game mode throughout on different levels as well if you want to, but just know that there is this flexibility available to you if you want it. Yeah, so game mode is generally the class where you keep the game rules. That's what it's meant for. And we don't have to consider these colors here because these are related to multiplayer, which we will not be touching at all today, but in a future episode we can go into networking and replication and things like that, and we will go back to game modes and all of these other modes again then. As the next topic of classes, and yes, all of these white squares are all individual classes that you can use in Unreal Engine as well. That's what they're representing. And they are depicting their different relationships with each other. So a game mode would be something that exists on a map or multiple maps. A game state is something that you would have on a specific map, and it would keep track of the state of the game. Meaning, let's say you had something like the little first creation game that we made earlier in the tutorial series, where we made this little game where you walk around just picking up boxes and putting them off in different areas. You had a game state keeping track of how much time you had available to you while playing. And if the game state ran out of time, it should have then told the game mode that we have run out of time, and the game mode should be telling all the players that the game is over. So the game state is very closely related to the game mode because it's keeping track of the moment-to-moment details about the game mode. In addition to that, you see that we have something called a player state. A player state is a class where you can have the opportunity to keep track of player-related information that you do not want to keep in its pawn. And this will become clearer as we go along and describe the other parts and classes here, but for now it's important to know that a game state has a relationship of 1 to many. That's what these numbers mean here, the 1 and the star representing many. So we can have multiple, or 1 if there's only one player, player states per game state. So a player state is locked to a specific player, and the player in turn is in control of a player controller. So generally when we're talking about games in Unreal, we don't have what you generally see is the character that you're running around with, but that's not actually the player. The player is the puppeteer that is actually controlling the pawn or the character, and that is what this class is. So each player is actually a player controller which has a player state connected to it, or could have. Again, you're not forced. And one player controller can at any point only control one pawn. So the relationship between a controller and a pawn is always 1-to-1. Now you might be thinking, but you've played games where you had like multiple things, like StarCraft 2 for example. You played with multiple units at the same time. And that is true. However, most or none of these were pawns that were possessed by you. They were not directly under your control. More likely than anything, it would be something along the lines of you're selecting a unit in StarCraft and you're telling it to go somewhere. And then an AI controller would come in and control that pawn or unit until it got to the point where you told it to go. That's how it would be set up in Unreal. You would have a player controller where you could mark different pawns and say, I want you to go here and do that and attack that and gather this. And then the actual actions would be performed by individual AI controllers, which would take control of one pawn each. And then they would complete whatever assignment that you gave them earlier. So back to a player controller. A player controller usually has a HUD, heads-up display. This is the user interface representation of what you can see on your screen. You're not forced to put it on the player controller. You can put it on the pawn as well. But if you have a game where you have the ability to possess different pawns, so you have like a man over here and a woman over here, and you can freely swap between them. If you want to have a uniform user interface that's supposed to look the same for both of them, you might want to put the HUD on the player controller. The different pawns, the man and the woman, could in turn, if they wanted to have very different HUDs, have a specific HUD to just that class. if that was what one was after. But generally the connection between the player controller and the HUD is also one-to-one, and a HUD as a concept has the relationship of one-to-many when it comes to UMG widgets, because you're not forced to have one widget. When you're creating a user interface like we did earlier in the tutorial series, you saw that we created multiple widgets. We created one for a button and one for health and so on. Actually, we did not. We created one widget, but you can create a widget for health and then another widget for mana, and then put both of those widgets into your HUD as separate elements. So yeah, that's basically how these things are connected to each other. And today we will be demonstrating a very simple example of how you can make a game, or not a game, but a small demo of having multiple maps with multiple game modes and multiple different of these classes that are individually different, and how we can make them play together with each other. So now we're in Unreal Engine. We're using 4.26 as a version today if you want to follow along. And to begin with, let's go to settings and project settings. Under here we can go to maps and modes. And here you can see what we have just been discussing. In the bottom here we have the game instance class, which is a important class by itself, but it's not directly related to the other things. But you have one game instance class in the game, and this is where you set that one. Other than that, you have up here in our default modes. These are the modes that we have as the baseline for any game that we're creating. So if we were to make a map, and then these would be the settings that it would have normally. So if we have like first person, since this is a first person template, first person game mode is what makes sense. And then you see that we have a default game mode, and this would be the game mode that a new map would have. And then we have some game or classes related to that, like we spoke about earlier. So we have our default pawn class. So our first person game mode will have a first person character as the default pawn. It will have the first person HUD as the default HUD class. It will have the player controller as the default player controller class. Game state base as its default game state class. Player state as its player state class, and spectator pawn as its spectator class. So it's perfectly fine to change these around in here in the project settings, and then they will affect all the other maps that you make. So if we first start off with creating a map here, a new level, and we call this okay, so I call that one tutorial 11_1 level. And if we were to open this map, it would be completely black. We would not have anything in it, as you can see out here in the world outliner. So if we just start off with putting in some basic things here, like directional light, and we can put in something very fundamental like a cube. So if we were not to have the light, we would not see the cube, but the combination of a cube and the light is the most basic things that we can have. So we'll just scale this so we have something like a platform, right? So now we have our level technically here. And in the level here you have world settings. So in here you have settings for this specific world. So if we were to pick here our first person game mode and all of the things that comes with it, and then we were to save this, and then we duplicate this level and call it tut_11_2, let's say. I'm sorry. And we go into that one. It will have the same game mode because we duplicated it from there. But in here we're perfectly free to have a completely different game mode. So let's create one. So we'll create one called, and we'll put it somewhere. Let's see where everything else is. So BP underscore tutorial 11 game mode. So now we made a game mode here and we have it available in our folder. Now we can change to our BP tutorial 11 game mode, which means it has now replaced the existing game mode. So if we were to have some logic in the original game mode that can be completely differentiated from this in this game mode, just by having it in different maps. And we're not restricted to just that either. We can continue here and say that in this game mode, in this particular level, we want to have first person character as a default pawn class still, and that would be perfectly fine. So to demonstrate this quickly, let's go back to the first map, and just to have a player start, there we have. So when we press play now, this is where we will be spawning, and it will be going here and checking if we have an override. It will go and check, okay, what is our default pawn class, and it's his first person character, and it will spawn in that. If we were not to have an override here, it will go to the project settings game mode instead and check which is the default pawn class there and use that here. So if we press play, you can see we have spawned in here with our character that has the health and the mana from the previous episodes. And if we go into tutorial 2 here and put in a player start and press play, you see that we have the same character here, or the same pawn, because we chose that here. But if we were to do something else here now, like for example, let's go to our first person character and we create a child blueprint class. We keep the name it gives us and we just move it into our folder here. So now we have a child here where of the first person character. We can choose this one instead as our default pawn now here, and if we were to play in here now we would have that one, although it's not visible because it's a sub-child, or it's a child, so it will have exactly the same functionality as the first person character that we had before. But we can easily make a little bit of a change here just to differentiate, to show you how it works. So let's see here, we open up the first person. We can do that by pressing this little wrench up in the top right in the child blueprint class. And you can see here among the other things here is that when we press Q in the first person character, it will type out the difficulty. And just to prove that, we can go back to our tutorial 11 level here where we've spawned in with our first person character. So if I spam, alright, my bad. It goes and gets it from the game mode. Let's just do something simple. We don't want the functionality to be too overwhelming. We just want to go through the concepts of how things are held together, right? So we'll type in here first person character. So this is just to show that this person, or this pawn, when we're playing with this pawn, press Q, it says first person character. If we were to go to the other map now where the first person child is and we press Q, this exact same thing will happen because it is a child. It has the same functionality, just inherited, right? But now we can go in here and say instead on Q, which is the key we used for the print string, we can say now print and say first person child. Like so. And now if we go into this map and we press Q, it says first person child instead, because now the child's Q functionality will be overwriting the parent's Q functionality. So that's how easy it is to have a different pawn assigned. And equally with all the other classes here, it's like the player, the HUD, the game state, the game player state, the spectator. All of them are easily replaceable by just pressing the plus sign here and then adding whichever functionality you want to have instead of the original class. Now, to demonstrate how two different levels with different game modes can have different rules, we'll just do a simple example there as well. So when our normal game state, which is the first person character, if we just let's go back to our first level here, we'll go in here and we'll see where that one is by clicking the magnifying glass. So this is the first person game mode. It doesn't have anything in the beginning. Everything that it contains is the information about which other classes it should be using as its default values. But if we were to go in here and do something really simple, like begin play, so this is when the game mode is created, we can print off this one and say basic game mode rules. Basically saying any level where we have this game mode created in, it will say game mode, basic game mode mode, basic game mode rules, like so. So in our first level here, you can see it says basic game mode rules. So the rules of the first game mode applies in here. Now if we were to go into our second game mode and say something different here for the begin play, we'll say that print string completely different set of rules. So now if we were to play on this level, which is 11.2, you see that it types out that information. So now this is just a simple text string. It doesn't show you anything complex, but it shows you that you can have these different game modes in different levels and it's fine. And to make it even more abundantly clear, let's see if we have a teleporter here, and the teleporter makes its teleportation based on the enum levels. So if we change it to have also this level here, so this is the one with a separate game mode. We add this to the levels here, so we can actually teleport between them. And this teleporter functionality, I did not copy it, it seems. This teleport functionality is something we did in an earlier tutorial. I'll post a link down below if you want to go see that one. But here you see now we have added our new level here. And if we go to this teleporter and say we want to teleport to that map. And let's see here, we are in the wrong map, however. We are in the 2 map. We want to go from the 1 map to the 2 map to demonstrate this. So we'll just put the teleporter in here and we set it to teleport to the other map, like so. And then we start playing here. So now we spawn in here with the basic game mode rules in here, and we have this teleporter in here. So if we go into that one, you can see completely different set of rules. So we transitioned from one map to another one, which means we will break down the first map and deconstruct everything there, and we will build up this new map here and construct everything here, including all the game modes and the pawns and everything like that. And the completely different set of rules is available to be used here if we wanted it to. That should hopefully cover game modes. It's not a difficult concept. It might be a little bit feel a little bit overwhelming in the beginning, but it's really simple if we just reflect on it a little bit. The project settings have the game modes and also the game instance, which is the default ones which will be used on all maps, unless you go to a specific map and go to its world settings and choose to override it. If it's set to none, it will use what's in the project settings. If it's overridden, it will use the default classes that the game mode is set up with. So in this case here we have the tutorial 11 game mode. And if we open that one up, we see that we actually find it over here. If we click on BP tutorial 11 game mode, you see here the classes that it has available by standard. But even this, you can see default pawn class child here is what it's set up for here. But that doesn't prevent us from going over here and changing this from the child to the character again if we wanted to. So you can change this freely if you want. However, those two things are the override here is linked with whatever game mode you have selected. So any changes you make here, like for example we changed to first person character here now, you'll see that it has first person character now set as default pawn class. So it changing on either of these sides changes the other. So if we change this one back to the child here, compile and save, it has now changed this one to child as well. So they are linked, just so you know. But this allows you to have, if you wanted to, one single game mode for the whole game you want to create, or a single game mode for each and every level that you want to create, and then make whichever rules you want like that. In addition to that, of course, this is just the default pawn class. It is what the game will spawn in for player starts by default. It doesn't limit you in what kind of pawns you want to use anyway. So if you wanted to, you can always spawn in a different pawn of a different type and then possess it and then control it. But we'll deep a little bit more into possession when it comes to that tutorial. It will be done shortly, I think. But for now, you're not limited to this, but this is sort of the default help, what it will spawn in whenever you don't specify something specific for it to use, basically. I hope that makes sense. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. In the next video, we will be delving a little bit into possession, which we touched on a little bit today, and get a little bit deeper about what that actually means. That is all for now. Keep on learning.